I installed a camera in my living room, and what I saw changed everything. My husband and our neighbor were plotting together right under my nose. The people I trusted most were turning my entire world into a carefully staged lie. Before I continue, I need to share something with you. Stories like mine, they're not easy to tell. They're raw and painful and real. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt that sinking feeling that something isn't right in your own home, please hit that like button and subscribe. These stories need to reach people who are living through the same quiet nightmare, people who think they're alone. You're not alone, I promise you that. Let me take you back to where it all began. To my living room in Chicago, where the afternoon light would stream through the lace curtains I'd hung myself 30 years ago. I'm 72 now, and for most of those years, I believed I knew every corner of my life, every truth about the man I married. I'd wake up at 5:30 every morning, make coffee in the same blue percolator we received as a wedding gift, and watch Richard pretend to read the newspaper while actually scrolling through his phone. The house smelled like vanilla and old wood, a scent I'd grown to associate with safety and home. That particular morning started like any other. I was wearing my worn terry cloth robe, the green one with the frayed cuffs that Richard always said I should throw away. My hands, spotted with age and arthritis, trembled slightly as I poured the coffee. I'd been feeling that tremor more and more lately, a physical manifestation of something I couldn't quite name. Our neighbor, Patricia, had texted me the night before, canceling our usual Tuesday morning walk. Again. That made 3 weeks in a row. The message was brief, almost cold. Can't make it. Sorry. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at her house across the street. The blue shutters needed painting. I'd mentioned it to her husband months ago, offered to help. He'd smiled that tight smile people give when they're humoring you and said they'd get to it. They never did. I watched Patricia's car pull out of the driveway at 7:15, same as always. She didn't wave. She used to wave. The thing is, when someone changes their behavior toward you, it happens so gradually that you convince yourself you're imagining it. Patricia and I had been walking buddies for 10 years. We'd discussed everything on those walks, our children, our marriages, our fears about getting older. She'd told me about her mother's battle with cancer. I'd told her about my struggles with arthritis. We'd shared recipes, book recommendations, complaints about our husband's quirks. Or at least, I thought we were sharing. Now I wonder if she was just collecting information, gathering ammunition. I remember one walk in particular, maybe 6 months before everything fell apart. We were circling the park near our neighborhood, and Patricia had seemed distant, distracted. I'd asked if everything was okay, and she'd waved me off with a tight smile. "Just stressed about money," she'd said. "Mark's business isn't doing well. I worry about our future." I'd reached out and squeezed her hand. "If you ever need anything," I'd told her. "Richard and I, we're doing okay. We could help if things get really tight." She'd looked at me then with an expression I couldn't read at the time. Something between gratitude and something else. Something darker. "You're so generous," she'd said. "So trusting." At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now I understood it was an assessment. I was marking myself as an easy target. The photographs on our mantel told a different story than the one I was living. There was Richard and me on our wedding day, both of us impossibly young and filled with dreams we thought were shared. There were pictures of our children, grown now with families of their own in different states. Pictures of grandchildren who called on birthdays and Christmas, their voices bright and distant through the phone. I'd raised those children in this house, sacrificed my career as a teacher to stay home, to build what I thought was an unshakable foundation. I remember picking up one particular photo that morning, the glass cool against my palm. It was from our 40th anniversary party, just 2 years ago. Richard had his arm around me, both of us smiling at the camera. But looking at it now, I could see something in his eyes I'd missed before. A distance, a calculation. How long had I been blind? I'd thrown that party myself, spent weeks planning it. I'd made the invitations by hand, addressing each one with careful calligraphy I'd taught myself from YouTube videos. I'd arranged for catering, hired a photographer, decorated our backyard with string lights and flowers. Richard had complained about the expense, said we should keep it small, but I'd insisted. 40 years of marriage deserved celebration. Patricia and Mark had been there, of course. I remembered Patricia pulling me aside that evening, glass of champagne in hand, telling me how lucky I was to have such a stable, loving marriage. 40 years, she'd said, shaking her head in admiration. You two are an inspiration. She'd hugged me, and I'd felt genuine warmth in that embrace. Or had I? Was I rewriting memories now, seeing deception where there'd been none? Or had I been blind then, refusing to see what was right in front of me? The basement, that's where everything changed. I'd been putting off cleaning it for months, maybe years. Richard always said he'd handle it, that it was too much for me, that I should rest. Rest. That word had become his favorite tool. Every time I wanted to be involved in our finances, our future, our decisions, he'd pat my hand and tell me to rest. So that morning, out of spite or stubbornness, or maybe just exhaustion with resting, I decided to tackle it myself. The stairs creaked under my weight. Each step down felt like descending into a secret I wasn't supposed to discover. The basement smelled of mildew and old cardboard, of forgotten things left to decay. The single bulb overhead flickered when I pulled the chain, casting unstable shadows across boxes stacked against concrete walls. I started with the filing cabinet in the corner, the one Richard said contained old tax returns and insurance papers. Nothing important, he'd always said. Nothing I needed to worry about. The metal drawer resisted at first, the tracks rusty from disuse. When it finally gave way, it screeched loud enough to make me wince. The first folder I opened contained documents I didn't recognize, legal papers with letterheads from firms I'd never heard of. I sat on an old wooden chair, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the small window, and began to read. My heart started to pound, a heavy drumbeat in my chest that made my hands shake worse than the arthritis ever did. There were contracts, property agreements, transfer documents, all signed with my signature, except I'd never seen them before, never signed a single one. The handwriting was close, remarkably close, but it wasn't mine. I knew my own signature. I'd been signing my name for 72 years. The curve of the E was wrong, the loop of the L too wide. Small differences, but unmistakable once I really looked. The dates went back 5 years. 5 years of forgery. 5 years of Richard signing my name to papers that moved our money, our assets, our future into accounts I didn't know existed. I pulled out another folder, then another. Each one revealed more layers of deception. There were bank statements for accounts I'd never opened, investment portfolios in my name that I'd never authorized, loan applications with my forged signature used as collateral. The amounts were staggering, the scope overwhelming, and there, on document after document, was another signature beside his. Patricia Henderson, our neighbor. The woman I'd walked with every Tuesday for a decade. The woman I'd invited to Christmas dinner. The woman whose tears I'd dried when her mother died. Her signature, legitimate and bold, next to my forged one. One document in particular made my stomach turn. It was a partnership agreement dated 3 years ago, establishing a business entity called Henderson Patterson Investments, LLC. Except I'd never agreed to be anyone's business partner. I'd never even heard of this company. Yet there was my signature, or rather Richard's forgery of it, establishing me as a 50% partner alongside Patricia. The business had been used to purchase properties, flip them, and funnel the profits into accounts I had no access to. According to the paperwork, we'd bought and sold 7 properties in 3 years. The total profit exceeded $400,000. Money that should have been mine, that was legally mine according to these forged documents, but that I'd never seen a penny of. I sat in that basement for 3 hours, reading through folder after folder. They'd created shell companies, moved money through accounts in both our names and Patricia's. There were plans to develop properties, to flip houses, to invest in ventures I didn't understand. And running through it all like a poisonous river was my money, the inheritance from my parents, the savings from the small business I'd run before I retired. My net worth, accumulated over a lifetime, being systematically drained and redirected. There was even correspondence between Richard and Patricia, printed emails discussing strategy. One from Richard made me physically ill. She signed the refinance papers without even reading them. Took me less than 5 minutes to convince her it was routine paperwork. We're clear to move forward with Phase 2. Phase 2. Like my financial ruin, was a military operation requiring tactical planning. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I'd stopped checking our accounts years ago. Richard had seemed annoyed when I asked questions, had made me feel stupid for not understanding the basics of finance. "You don't have a head for numbers," he'd told me repeatedly. "That's why I handle this stuff. You focus on keeping the house nice." So I'd stopped asking. I'd trusted him. That trust had cost me my fortune. When I finally climbed those basement stairs, my legs barely held me. The wooden railing felt rough under my palm, splinters catching on my skin. I made it to the kitchen and sat at the table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals, where I'd helped our children with homework, where Richard and I had toasted to our future. The afternoon light was fading. I'd been down there all day. I hadn't eaten. I couldn't eat. I just sat there, staring at my hands, these old hands that had worked so hard, that had built a life I thought was real. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second marking time that had already been stolen from me. How many hours had I spent cooking Richard's favorite meals while he plotted with Patricia? How many nights had I fallen asleep beside him, trusting and content, while he texted our neighbor about which account to drain next? The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a betrayal of every moment, every shared experience, every memory I'd believed was genuine. Richard came home at 6, same as always. I heard his key in the lock, heard him call out, "Honey, I'm home," in that cheerful voice he used when he wanted something from me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the weight of what I knew, by the impossibility of the betrayal. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, and stopped when he saw me. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look pale." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folders at him, to demand answers, to hear him try to explain away 5 years of lies. But I didn't. I just looked at him, this man I'd loved for 50 years, and saw a stranger, a con artist, a thief who'd stolen not just my money, but my trust, my peace, my sense of reality. "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "Just tired." "You should rest more," he said, patting my shoulder as he headed to the refrigerator. "I've told you, you do too much." The hypocrisy of it stung like acid. He was telling me to rest while actively working to ensure I'd have nothing to rest on. No financial security for my actual retirement years. That night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to him breathe. The sound that had comforted me for half a century now filled me with revulsion. I thought about all the mornings I'd made his coffee, all the dinners I'd prepared, all the times I'd supported his decisions, deferred to his judgment, believed in his love. Had any of it been real? Or had I been nothing more than a resource to be exploited, a source of income for his schemes with Patricia? I counted the years, 50 years of marriage, approximately 18, 250 mornings waking up beside him, roughly 50 zero-zerk meals prepared, countless loads of his laundry washed, folded, put away, decades of emotional support, physical care, unwavering loyalty. And he'd repaid it by systematically stealing everything I had. The weight of it pressed down on me like a physical force. I couldn't breathe properly. The room felt too small, too hot, suffocating. I wanted to run, to escape, but where could I go? This was my home, my life. Or at least I'd thought it was. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as cars passed outside, and I made a decision. I would gather evidence. I would document everything. and I would find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I lied to Richard. I told him I was going to visit my sister in Milwaukee for a few days. He seemed relieved, almost eager to have me gone. He helped me pack, kissed my forehead, told me to drive carefully. The kiss felt like a Judas betrayal, his lips dry and cool against my skin. I saw Patricia watching from her window as I loaded my suitcase into the car. She didn't wave then either, but she smiled, a small, satisfied smile that made my blood run cold. She thought she'd won. They both did, but I didn't go to Milwaukee. I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and sat there, drinking bitter coffee and planning. The cafe was one of those modern places with exposed brick and reclaimed wood tables, full of young people typing on laptops, living lives that still held possibility and trust. I envied them their naivety, even as I knew I'd once been just as blind. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done. I needed proof that would stand up, that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as a misunderstanding by some sweet old lady who didn't understand business. I spent 3 hours in that cafe, making lists on napkins. Every suspicious conversation I could remember. Every time Richard had been evasive about finances, every canceled walk with Patricia. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just refused to see it. I drove back to the house 2 hours later, parking around the corner. I walked up the back alley, let myself in through the kitchen door. The house was silent. Richard had gone to work, or wherever he actually went during the day. I'd stopped believing anything he told me. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, but ominous. Every corner held potential secrets. Every drawer might contain more evidence of betrayal. I moved through rooms I'd lived in for decades, as if seeing them for the first time, wondering what else I'd missed, what other lies were hiding in plain sight. I set up the camera that afternoon. I'd bought it at an electronics store, told the young clerk I wanted to keep an eye on my dog while I was away. He'd been helpful and patient, showing me how to use it, how to connect it to my phone, how to review the footage. "My grandmother just got one of these," he'd said cheerfully. "She loves being able to check on her cats during the day." I'd smiled and nodded, playing the role of the harmless elderly woman. But inside, I was calculating, planning, preparing for war. It was easier than I'd expected. I hid it on the bookshelf in the living room, behind a row of photo albums no one looked at anymore. The little red light was barely visible. It had a perfect view of the couch, the coffee table, the entire room where Richard usually sat in the evenings. Then I left again, drove to a motel on the outskirts of the city, and waited. I sat in that sterile room with its flowered bedspread and its smell of industrial cleaner, and I watched my phone. I watched my living room. I watched my life. The motel was one of those anonymous chain places off the highway, the kind where people stay when they're passing through, when they're running from something, when they need to disappear for a while. The walls were thin. I could hear the couple arguing next door, hear the television blaring from the room above. But I tuned it all out, my eyes fixed on the small screen in my hand, waiting for Richard to reveal himself. Richard came home at 6:30. He made himself a drink, something he rarely did when I was home. Whiskey, neat, in the crystal glasses we'd received as a wedding gift. He settled on the couch with his laptop and his phone. At 7:15, there was a knock at the door. I watched him answer it. Patricia walked in like she owned the place, carrying a folder, smiling at my husband like they shared a delicious secret. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I set it on the cheap motel nightstand, propping it against the lamp so I could still see the screen. I needed to witness this. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. They sat on my couch, in my living room, and they talked about money, about me, about their plans. The audio was crystal clear. I heard everything. "She still doesn't suspect anything?" Patricia asked, crossing her legs, sipping the wine Richard had poured for her. She was wearing a dress I recognized, a blue one I'd complimented her on just last month. She'd told me it was new, that Mark had bought it for her birthday. Had Richard actually paid for it? With my money? Nothing. She's too trusting, too naive. Richard laughed, actually laughed. I've been telling her for years that she doesn't understand finances. She believes it. The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This wasn't a man struggling with guilt or moral conflict. This was someone who enjoyed deceiving me, who took pleasure in my ignorance. The property transfer went through, Patricia said, pulling papers from the folder. Once we sell her parents' old house, that's another $200,000. Plus, the business sale should clear next month. My parents' house. The home I'd grown up in, the house my father had built with his own hands in the summers, coming home exhausted from his day job to saw and hammer and paint. The house my mother had filled with love and laughter and the smell of fresh bread. They'd left it to me when they died, made me promise to keep it in the family, to pass it on to my children. And Richard had sold it without telling me, without even asking. And she thinks we're keeping it for sentimental reasons, Richard said. God, this has been easier than I thought it would be. I watched them toast with my wine glasses in my living room, celebrating the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. They talked for 2 hours. They discussed how much longer they could keep it going, how much more they could extract before I caught on. They laughed about how I'd actually thanked Richard for managing our finances just last week. At one point, Patricia leaned back against the couch cushions, swirling her wine. You know what the best part is? She said. She actually feels sorry for me. Last month, she offered to lend me money if Mark and I were having trouble. Can you imagine? Offering to give me money when we've already taken hundreds of thousands from her. They both laughed at that. The sound of their laughter, casual and cruel and utterly without remorse, broke something inside me. These weren't people who'd made a mistake, who'd gotten in over their heads and didn't know how to get out. These were predators who'd targeted me deliberately, who took joy in my exploitation. What happens when she finds out? Patricia asked at one point, a flicker of concern crossing her face. Richard shrugged. She won't, and if she does, what's she going to do? She's 72. No one takes old women seriously when they make accusations like this. We'll say she's confused, maybe developing dementia. Who's going to believe her over us? That was the moment I understood the full scope of their plan. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd been building a narrative around my supposed incompetence, my alleged confusion, my supposed inability to understand basic financial matters. It was preemptive gaslighting, laying the groundwork to discredit me if I ever discovered the truth. I sat in that motel room and I cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. The people in the next room probably heard me. I didn't care. I cried for the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed in love and partnership and family. I cried for the years I'd wasted, the trust I'd given so freely. I cried for my parents, who'd worked so hard to leave me something, never imagining their son-in-law would steal it while pretending to love me. The bedspread smelled like detergent and other people's lives. I curled up on it, fully clothed, phone still playing the video of Richard and Patricia laughing in my living room, and I let the grief wash over me. 50 years. Half a century of my life given to a man who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. But then, somewhere around midnight, the tears stopped. Something else took their place. Something hard and cold and clear. Rage, pure, focused rage. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was swollen from crying, my eyes red. But there was something else there too. A determination I hadn't felt in decades. I was done being naive. Done being the trusting fool they thought I was. I was going to fight back. The next morning, I drove back home. I walked in like I'd just returned from my sister's, called out a cheerful greeting. Richard came down the stairs, smiled at me, asked how the trip was. I smiled back. I told him it was wonderful. I made him coffee. I pretended everything was normal. But while he was at work, I copied every document in that basement filing cabinet. I photographed every page, uploaded everything to a cloud storage account he didn't know existed. I went through his computer, his email, his phone records. I found more evidence than I'd imagined possible. 5 years of systematic fraud, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, properties bought and sold under shell company names, Patricia's name on everything, my forged signature beside Richard's real one. I also found emails between them, not just about money, personal emails, intimate emails. They'd been having an affair for 7 years. 7 years of him coming home to me, sleeping beside me, while carrying on with the woman across the street. The financial betrayal was devastating. This was something else entirely. This was the complete annihilation of everything I'd believed about my life. The emails were explicit, both sexually and emotionally. They wrote to each other like teenagers in love, using pet names that made me nauseous. Richard called her my little schemer. She called him my handsome con artist. They joked about their crimes, romanticized their betrayal, treated their systematic theft of my life savings as some kind of exciting adventure they were on together. I printed those emails. I couldn't help myself. I read them over and over, torturing myself with the details. Patricia writing about how boring I was, how Richard deserved better. Richard complaining about having to maintain the charade of a happy marriage. Both of them laughing about how gullible I was, how easy I was to manipulate. There was one email from Patricia that particularly stung. She'd written it after one of our Tuesday walks, the day I'd consoled her about her mother's death. "Just got back from my walk with the Mark," she'd written. "She's so pathetically eager to help. Actually offered to make meals for us this week. I said yes, of course. Why not let her cook for us while we're stealing her blind? Richard, you should have seen her face when I cried about my mom. So sincere, so caring. It almost made me feel guilty. Almost." I remembered that day vividly. I'd seen Patricia's eyes red from crying as she came to my door that morning. I'd hugged her, held her while she sobbed, canceled our walk so we could just sit on my porch and talk about her mother. I'd spent the next week bringing casseroles and soups to her house, leaving them on her porch with little notes of encouragement. She'd texted me thank you messages that seemed so heartfelt, and all along she'd been laughing at my compassion, mocking my kindness, using my sympathy as material for jokes with my husband. Another email detailed a close call they'd had. Richard had accidentally left some documents on his desk at home, and I'd walked in while he was reviewing them. "I thought it was over," he'd written to Patricia. She came right up to the desk. I was sure she'd see the Henderson-Patterson letterhead, but I just smiled, shuffled them under some other papers, and told her I was working on our taxes. She actually apologized for disturbing me. Apologized. Then she brought me coffee and closed the door so I could concentrate in peace. I swear, sometimes I think she wants to be deceived. I remembered that moment. It had been maybe 8 months ago. I'd felt bad for interrupting him, had tiptoed away so carefully, so respectful of his privacy, his space, his supposed hard work on our behalf. And he'd been laughing at me the entire time. There were dozens of emails like this, hundreds maybe. Years of correspondence chronicling my exploitation, narrating my humiliation, documenting my betrayal in real time. They'd created an archive of my destruction, and they'd done it with joy, with humor, with absolute contempt for my humanity. One email from Richard to Patricia stood out. It was from 3 years ago. She actually said she trusts me with everything. Can you believe it? I could sell the house out from under her, and she'd probably thank me for handling it. Sometimes I almost feel bad, but then I remember how much money we're making, and I get over it. That line, "Sometimes I almost feel bad," was the closest he ever came to expressing remorse in any of the emails. And even that tiny flicker of conscience was immediately extinguished by greed. I wasn't a person to him. I was a revenue stream, a resource, an ATM with a heartbeat. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that printed email, and something inside me broke. Not broke like shattering, but broke like a wall coming down. The wall that had kept me passive, that had kept me accepting, that had made me believe being a good wife meant being blind to reality. That wall crumbled, and what was left was a woman who was done being a victim. I spent the next 3 weeks gathering more evidence. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah, who specialized in financial fraud. I paid her with money from an old account Richard didn't know about, one I'd opened years ago with a small inheritance from an aunt. It wasn't much, but it was mine, untouched. Sarah was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no nonsense. When I first met her in her small office downtown, I was nervous, ashamed even. I felt like I was betraying my marriage by hiring her. But she looked at my evidence, looked at me, and said something that changed everything. "You're not betraying anyone. They betrayed you. You're just protecting yourself." Those words hit me like a physical force. I'd been carrying so much guilt, so much shame, as if I was the one doing something wrong by investigating. As if loyalty meant accepting abuse, as if love meant allowing theft. Sarah's simple statement reframed everything. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the victim finally fighting back. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked, flipping through the documents I'd brought. "5 years, based on what I found. But maybe longer. I don't know what else I've missed." Sarah looked up at me, her expression softening slightly. "The fact that you found this much tells me you're not the confused, helpless woman they think you are. You're sharp. You're capable. They underestimated you. That's going to be their biggest mistake." Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah became more than my investigator. She became my ally, my coach, my reminder that I deserved better. She taught me how to gather evidence without tipping them off, how to document conversations, how to protect my remaining assets, how to build a case that would be bulletproof in court. Financial elder abuse cases are notoriously hard to prosecute, Sarah explained during one of our meetings. Often it's one person's word against another's, but you have documentation, forged signatures that can be analyzed, a paper trail that shows intent and premeditation, and most importantly, you have that video. That's gold. That's them, in their own words, admitting everything. Sarah was thorough. She found business dealings I'd missed. She traced money through multiple shell companies, found properties in 3 different states that had been purchased with my money and sold for profit. The profit had gone into accounts only Richard and Patricia could access. She found wire transfers to offshore accounts, investment portfolios in fake names, even a boat Richard had purchased that was registered to one of their shell companies. One afternoon, Sarah called me with a discovery that made me physically sick. "I found receipts for jewelry," she said. "Expensive pieces. Tiffany, Cartier, Harry Winston, all purchased with funds traced back to your accounts, all given to Patricia. I thought about the small necklace Richard had given me for our 45th anniversary. A simple silver chain with a tiny pendant. It's not expensive," he'd said, "but I thought it was you. Simple, classic, unpretentious. I'd worn it every day, touched it like a talisman, a symbol of his enduring affection. And all the while, he'd been buying Patricia diamond bracelets and sapphire earrings with my inheritance money." "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice gentle. "I found receipts for a trip to Paris. 2 people, first-class flights, 5-star hotel, 2 weeks last spring. Do you remember Richard taking a trip last spring?" I did. He'd told me it was a business conference in Atlanta. A boring insurance industry thing, he'd said. He'd seemed annoyed about having to go, had complained about the waste of time. I'd offered to come along, make a vacation of it, but he'd said spouses weren't invited. I'd packed his suitcase for him, made sure he had everything he needed. I'd texted him every day he was gone, asking how the conference was going. He'd sent brief replies, boring. Long days. Miss you. He'd been in Paris with Patricia, drinking wine at sidewalk cafes, walking hand in hand along the Seine, staying in a suite that cost more per night than my monthly grocery budget, all with my money, all while texting me lies. The total came to just over $800,000, my entire net worth stolen over 5 years. Sarah laid it all out in a detailed report, with timelines and paper trails and evidence that would stand up in court. "This is one of the most systematic cases I've seen," Sarah told me during our final meeting. "They planned this carefully, but they also got greedy, and greedy people make mistakes. You have more than enough to prosecute." Sarah also found something else: plans to sell our house. The house I'd lived in for 45 years. The house where I'd raised my children. Richard and Patricia had already contacted a realtor. They were planning to tell me we needed to downsize, that it was too much for me to maintain. They'd already picked out a small condo for me, something cheap. The difference in price would go into their pockets. The realtor was someone Patricia knew, someone who was apparently in on the scheme. Sarah had called her, posing as a potential buyer, and recorded the conversation. The realtor had been remarkably candid. "It's a sad situation, really. Elderly woman, cognitive decline, needs to move into assisted living. The family wants to sell quickly and quietly. I'm sure we can get you a good deal." Cognitive decline. They were going to claim I had dementia to justify selling my house without my real consent. It was diabolical. The house was in both our names. They'd need my signature to sell it. I imagined Richard coming to me with the papers, using that gentle, condescending voice he'd perfected over the years, telling me it was for the best, telling me to trust him. And I imagined myself, the old me, signing without reading, believing he had my best interests at heart. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling Richard my back was bothering me. He seemed relieved to have the bed to himself. Some nights, I'd watch him through the camera feed on my phone, watching television in our living room, texting with Patricia, laughing at jokes I wasn't part of. Sometimes she'd come over after I'd gone to bed, and they'd sit together, planning my financial ruin while I was just upstairs. One night, I heard them talking about what they'd do once they had all my money. Richard wanted to buy a boat. Patricia wanted to travel through Europe. They talked about these dreams like they'd earned the money themselves, like it wasn't stolen from a woman who'd spent her whole life working and saving and sacrificing. "I'm thinking we could get a place in Florida," Richard said. "Somewhere warm, maybe on the water." "What about her?" Patricia asked. "She'll need somewhere to live after we sell the house." "The condo we picked out is fine. It's small, but it's all she needs. Besides, she won't be our problem much longer. She's old. How much longer can she really have?" The callousness took my breath away. He was literally waiting for me to die so he wouldn't have to deal with the consequences of his theft. I lay in that guest room bed, and I planned. Not revenge exactly, but justice, protection, survival. I thought about my children, about how I'd tell them. I thought about my grandchildren, about protecting their inheritance from a grandfather who'd proven himself a thief. I thought about every elderly woman in my support group, every person who'd been exploited by someone they trusted. And I made a vow. Richard and Patricia would face consequences, real ones. I went to see a lawyer, not a random one from the phone book, but someone Sarah recommended, a woman named Catherine Morrison, who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her office was in downtown Chicago, modern and professional, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was younger than my children, but when I told her my story, showed her the evidence I'd gathered, I saw steel in her eyes. "This is extensive," Catherine said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. The affair complicates things emotionally, but legally, we're looking at clear-cut financial crimes." She was efficient and thorough, taking notes, asking pointed questions, building the case piece by piece. She didn't judge me for staying as long as I did, for trusting as completely as I had. She treated me like a client who deserved justice, not a victim who'd brought this on herself. "Can I get my money back?" I asked. My voice was small, uncertain. Catherine looked at me directly. "We're going to try, but more importantly, we're going to make sure he can't take anything else, and we're going to make sure everyone knows what he did." We filed for divorce that week, not a quiet, amicable dissolution, but a full legal assault. We froze all joint accounts. We filed police reports for fraud and forgery. We sent letters to every institution they'd done business with, alerting them to the forged signatures. We filed injunctions preventing Richard from accessing or selling any jointly held assets. We subpoenaed bank records, phone records, email accounts. We made it loud and public and impossible to ignore. The papers were served to Richard at his office. I wasn't there, but his secretary later told me he'd gone white, had to sit down, had asked if it was some kind of mistake. He tried to call me 17 times in the first hour. I didn't answer. I was at Catherine's office, signing documents that would protect what was left of my assets, feeling a sense of power I hadn't experienced in decades. He came home that evening. I was sitting in the living room, in my usual chair, the camera still running behind me. He walked in, tie loosened, face red with anger or fear or both. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the divorce papers. "Have you lost your mind?" I looked at him calmly. I'd practiced this moment in my head 1,000 times. "No, Richard. I've found it. Finally. This is insane. We can work this out. Whatever you think is happening, I know what's happening. I know everything. The forged signatures, the shell companies, Patricia, the affair, the plans to sell our house. I know all of it." His face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, anger, calculation. I watched him decide how to play it. He chose pleading. "Honey, listen, you don't understand business. Some of those transactions, they look bad, but they're perfectly legal. I was trying to grow our income, to secure our future. With my money, without my knowledge, while forging my signature. That's not growing our future, Richard. That's stealing. You're overreacting. We've been married 50 years. You can't throw that away over a misunderstanding." 50 years, I repeated. 50 years of me trusting you, of me supporting you, of me believing we were partners, and you spent at least 7 of those years stealing from me and sleeping with our neighbor. So yes, I can throw it away. I already have. He tried a different approach. Think about the kids, the grandchildren. You're going to destroy our family over this? You destroyed our family. I'm just acknowledging it. His jaw clenched. I could see him struggling to maintain control, to find an angle that would work. "You'll regret this. You're making a huge mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you." He stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized pleading wouldn't work. His expression changed, hardened. The mask finally dropped completely. "You'll never prove anything. Those signatures could have been yours. You probably forgot signing them. You're getting old. People will think you're confused." "I have video," I said quietly, "of you and Patricia in this room discussing your plans, laughing about how naive I am, planning how to spend my money. Would you like to see it?" The color drained from his face. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard looked genuinely afraid. "You've been spying on me? In my own home? That's not spying. That's protecting myself." "You crazy bitch," he hissed. And there it was, the real Richard, the one he'd hidden for 50 years. "You think you're so smart now? You think you can beat me? I'll bury you in legal fees. I'll make sure everyone knows you're a paranoid, delusional old woman." Good luck with that. I stood up, surprising myself with how steady I felt. "You should leave now. Catherine filed for a restraining order. It'll be granted tomorrow, but I'd prefer you go voluntarily tonight." He left that night, packed a bag, and walked out without another word. I later learned he went straight to Patricia's house. I received a call from Sarah 2 hours later. Patricia's husband, Mark, had come home to find them together. Sarah had alerted him to what was happening, had shown him the evidence of the affair. The screaming could be heard from the street. I stood at my front window, watching the lights blazing in Patricia's house across the street, watching shadows move behind the curtains. Part of me felt satisfaction, but mostly I felt tired, so deeply tired, like I'd been carrying an enormous weight for years and had only just set it down. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Richard tried to fight the divorce, tried to claim the documents were fake, tried to paint me as a confused old woman who didn't understand what she was signing. But Catherine was relentless. She had forensic handwriting analysts prove the signatures were forged. She had the video footage. She had testimony from Sarah, from the bank managers who'd processed the transfers, from the companies that had received my money. The court proceedings were brutal. Richard's lawyer tried to discredit me at every turn. In one deposition, they asked me detailed questions about our finances from years ago, trying to prove I'd been aware of the transactions. Catherine had prepared me for this, but it was still humiliating to sit there while a stranger interrogated me about my own life, implying I was either complicit or incompetent. Mrs. Patterson, you're saying you never reviewed your bank statements? My husband handled our finances. I trusted him. You're saying you signed documents without reading them? He told me they were routine paperwork, tax forms, insurance updates. I trusted him. You're saying you had no idea your parents' house had been sold? He told me we were keeping it for our children. I trusted him. Over and over, the same questions, the same pattern. They were trying to make me seem foolish, trying to suggest this was somehow my fault. But Catherine had anticipated this strategy. When it was her turn, she presented the video evidence. The entire courtroom watched Richard and Patricia in my living room, laughing about my naivety, planning my exploitation, celebrating their theft. The room was silent when it finished. Even Richard's lawyer looked uncomfortable. You can argue about documents, about signatures, about who knew what when. But you can't argue with video of two people gleefully admitting to fraud. Patricia turned on Richard. When faced with her own legal troubles, she gave statements implicating him as the mastermind. She claimed he'd convinced her to participate, had promised her a future together, had told her I'd never find out, that even if I did, I'd be too weak to fight back. He said she was like a trained dog, Patricia testified in her deposition, that she'd believe anything he told her, that she was so desperate for his approval she'd sign anything he put in front of her. Hearing my own neighbor, my former friend, describe me that way in a legal deposition was devastating. But it was also evidence. It established intent, pattern, premeditation. Patricia thought she was saving herself by blaming Richard, but she was actually corroborating everything Catherine had argued about their systematic exploitation of me. They were both guilty, and now they were tearing each other apart, each trying to paint the other as the true villain. I watched this dissolution with a strange detachment. These people had been the center of my world. Richard had been my partner for 50 years. Patricia had been my confidant for 10. And now they were strangers, worse than strangers, revealing themselves as the cruel, selfish predators they'd always been. My children were devastated. They flew in from their different states, tried to understand how their father could have done this. My daughter, Jennifer, arrived first. She walked into the house we'd both lived in for so many years and just stood in the entryway, crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of an adult, but the broken, gasping sobs of a child whose world had shattered. "How could he do this to you?" she kept asking. "How could he do this to us?" I held her, this woman in her 40s with children of her own, and I felt the weight of what Richard had stolen. Not just money, but innocence. Not just assets, but trust. Jennifer would never look at her own marriage the same way. She'd never trust as completely. She'd carry this betrayal into her own life, her own relationships. Richard hadn't just hurt me. He'd damaged my children's ability to believe in love. My son Michael arrived the next day. His reaction was different. Pure rage. He wanted to find Richard, wanted to beat some sense into him. It took me an hour to calm him down, to convince him that violence would only make things worse, that we were handling this the right way. "He stole from you, Mom," Michael said, pacing my kitchen like a caged animal. "He stole your money, your time, your trust, and he did it while smiling at us, while pretending to be a good husband, a good father. Everything was a lie. Everything." "Not everything," I said quietly. "Your childhood was real. My love for you was real. The family we built, that was real, even if your father was only partially present. Don't let his betrayal take away the good memories. They're yours. He can't steal those." But even as I said it, I wondered if I believed it. Were any of those memories untainted? When Richard had coached Michael's little league team, had he been thinking about Patricia? When he'd walked Jennifer down the aisle at her wedding, had he been calculating how much of my inheritance was left to steal? How much of our family life had been real, and how much had been performance? The grandchildren were confused. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that their grandfather is a thief? That the man who taught them to ride bikes and took them for ice cream was systematically stealing from their grandmother? My oldest granddaughter, Emma, was 13, old enough to understand something terrible had happened, young enough to be deeply wounded by it. She came to me one afternoon, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, is it true what they're saying at school? That Grandpa stole money from you? That he was cheating on you?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect her from this ugly truth. But I'd spent too many years living in lies. I was done with that. "Yes, sweetie, it's true. Your grandfather made some very bad choices. He hurt me, and he hurt our family." "But he's Grandpa," she said, as if that explained everything, as if that made the betrayal impossible. "He's supposed to be good." "I thought so too," I told her. "That's why this is so hard. But sometimes people aren't who we think they are. And when we discover that, we have to deal with the truth, even when it hurts." Emma hugged me then, and I felt her small body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm sorry he did this to you. It's not your fault, baby. None of this is your fault. But the damage was done." Emma would grow up knowing that love wasn't always honest, that family could betray you, that even the people who seemed safest could be dangerous. Richard had stolen her innocence along with my money, and there was no way to get either back. The community rallied around me in ways I didn't expect. Other women, some younger, some my age, shared their own stories of financial betrayal. I learned I wasn't alone, that this kind of exploitation happened all the time, especially to women who'd trusted their husbands to handle money matters. We formed a support group, met weekly at the local library. We shared resources, legal contacts, emotional support. That first meeting, I walked into the library's community room expecting maybe 3 or 4 women. There were 17. 17 women in my community alone who'd been financially abused by people they'd trusted. The youngest was 28, recently discovered her fiancé had been stealing from her business. The oldest was 86, still fighting to recover money her grandson had taken. Each woman told her story. Each tale of betrayal was unique in its details, but identical in its devastation. Margaret, 65, had lost her entire retirement to her son, who'd convinced her to sign over power of attorney and then drained her accounts. "I gave birth to him," she said, her voice breaking. "I fed him, clothed him, raised him, and he repaid me by stealing my ability to survive my final years with dignity." Lisa, 42, had discovered her husband had taken out credit cards in her name and accumulated massive debt, over $200,000 she knew nothing about. "I only found out when debt collectors started calling," she told us. "He'd been hiding the bills for 3 years. When I confronted him, he said it was my fault for not being more financially aware. He made me feel guilty for discovering his crime." There was Janet, who'd been married for 30 years before discovering her husband had a second family in another state, funded entirely by her inheritance. There was Carolyn, whose business partner and best friend had been embezzling for a decade. There was Ruth, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her son to put Ruth in a nursing home so they could sell her house and keep the profit. We were all different ages, different backgrounds, but united by the betrayal of people we'd loved and trusted. And united by something else, the shame. The crippling, suffocating shame of having been deceived. "I feel so stupid," Janet said during that first meeting. "Everyone keeps asking me how I didn't know, how I didn't see the signs, like I'm an idiot for trusting my husband." Every woman in that room nodded. We'd all felt it. The shame wasn't just from the betrayal. It was from the aftermath, from people's reactions, from the implicit judgment in every question. How did you not know? As if we were complicit in our own exploitation. As if trust was a character flaw rather than a fundamental requirement for human relationships. Through these women, I found my strength. They reminded me that I wasn't stupid for trusting. I was betrayed. There's a difference. Trusting isn't a weakness. Exploiting that trust is a crime. We created a resource guide: how to spot financial abuse, how to protect your assets, how to gather evidence, which lawyers specialized in these cases, which therapists understood the trauma. We started giving presentations at senior centers, women's shelters, community centers. We spoke at churches and schools. We made it our mission to ensure that what happened to us wouldn't happen to others, or at least that others would know they weren't alone when it did. One woman approached me after a presentation I gave at a church. She was maybe 70, dressed impeccably, the picture of composure. But her hands were shaking. "Everything you described," she whispered. "My husband does all of that. The secrecy, the condescension, the isolation. I thought I was being paranoid, but now I think something's wrong." I gave her Catherine's card, gave her Sarah's number, gave her the resources we'd compiled. "Trust your instincts," I told her, "and protect yourself. Don't wait until it's too late." 6 months later, she called me. "You saved my life," she said. "I investigated. You were right. He'd been stealing for years, but because I caught it early, I was able to stop it before he took everything. Thank you for giving me permission to trust myself." That's when I understood the full value of what I'd been through. My pain had purpose. My betrayal had become my mission. I couldn't undo what Richard had done to me, but I could prevent him from destroying me, and I could help others do the same. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. I got the house. I got what was left of our savings. Catherine was able to recover about $300,000 from accounts Richard hadn't hidden well enough. The rest was gone, spent or hidden too cleverly to trace. But $300,000 was more than I'd expected to get back. It was enough to live on, to feel secure. Richard ended up with nothing except legal bills and a reputation in ruins. No one in our community would speak to him. His own children barely acknowledged him. He moved to Arizona, I heard, trying to start fresh somewhere people didn't know what he'd done. Patricia and Mark divorced. She also moved away, to California, I think. Mark stayed in the neighborhood for a while, apologized to me repeatedly for not seeing what was happening. I told him it wasn't his fault. We were both victims of people who saw us as resources, not partners. The house felt different after they all left. Bigger, quieter. For a while, I walked through rooms that echoed with memories I didn't know how to reconcile. How do you hold on to the good memories when you know the foundation was a lie? The birthdays celebrated in the dining room. The holidays by the fireplace. Were any of those moments real for Richard? Or was I the only one actually living them? I started therapy. A nice woman named Dr. Patricia. Yes, same name as my betrayer, which felt like a cruel joke at first, who specialized in trauma recovery. She helped me understand that I could grieve the life I thought I had while also celebrating my survival. That both things could be true at once. The first few sessions were brutal. I'd sit on Dr. Patricia's couch and just cry. Not about the money, but about the time. "I'm 72 years old," I told her during one session. "How many years do I have left? 10? 15 if I'm lucky?" And I wasted 50 of them with a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. I could have left him decades ago. I could have had a different life. But I stayed because I believed in marriage, in commitment, in love. And now I'm old and alone, and I can't get those years back. Dr. Patricia let me sit with that grief. She didn't try to fix it or minimize it. She just witnessed it. And then she said something that shifted my entire perspective. "You're not 72 years old starting from scratch," she said. "You're 72 years old with 72 years of experience, strength, and wisdom. Yes, Richard betrayed you. But in discovering that betrayal and fighting back, you've shown more courage than most people show in their entire lives. You're not beginning at the end. You're beginning a new chapter with all the knowledge you've gained from the previous ones. You spent 50 years building what you thought was a partnership," Dr. Patricia continued during another session. "The partnership might have been one-sided, but the building was real. Your effort was real. Your love was real. His betrayal doesn't erase what you put into that relationship. It just means you were the only one truly invested." "But doesn't that make me pathetic?" I asked. "Loving someone who was just using me?" "No," she said firmly. "It makes you human. It makes you someone capable of deep love and commitment. Those are beautiful qualities. Richard's inability to reciprocate isn't your failure. It's his. You demonstrated what a real partnership should look like. He demonstrated what exploitation looks like. History will judge which of you showed strength and which showed weakness." That helped. Slowly. The grief was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. It was something I could carry, could live with. More than that, it became something I could learn from, something that made me wiser, more careful, but not more closed off. I refused to let Richard's betrayal turn me into someone bitter and suspicious. He'd taken enough from me. He wasn't taking my capacity for trust, for hope, for connection. I started doing things I'd never done before. I'd always wanted to take an art class, but Richard had said it was frivolous, so I enrolled in a watercolor course at the community center. I was terrible at it, but I didn't care. I painted flowers that looked like blobs and landscapes that looked like abstract chaos, and I loved every minute of it. I joined a book club, read novels I chose for myself, not the business books Richard had always pushed on me. I discovered I loved mystery novels, ones where the betrayals were fictional and the justice was always served by page 300. I started traveling. Small trips at first, a weekend in Milwaukee to actually visit my sister, something I hadn't done in years, then bigger ones. I went to New York and saw Broadway shows. I went to Seattle and walked through Pike Place Market. I went to Santa Fe and ate green chili stew and watched the sunset over the mountains. Each trip felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I'd spent so long living Richard's life, fitting into his plans, that I'd forgotten I had dreams too. Turns out, I had a lot of them. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting on my front porch drinking iced tea when a woman walked up. She was younger, maybe in her 50s, well-dressed, nervous. "Mrs. Patterson?" she asked. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Ellen Henderson. I'm Patricia's sister." I stiffened. I hadn't expected this. "What do you want?" She sat down on the porch steps without invitation, which annoyed me. "I wanted to apologize. For my sister. For what she did to you." "You're not responsible for her choices." "No, but I knew she was capable of this. She's always been like this, taking things that weren't hers, justifying it somehow. I should have warned you, or Mark, or someone." Ellen looked at her hands. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone in her family thinks what she did was okay. We cut her off completely when we found out." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Ellen said something that surprised me. "My sister called me last month, from California. She said she was broke, asked if I could loan her money. I said no. She said I was being cruel. I told her she should have thought of that before she stole from someone who trusted her. I found myself almost smiling. Good for you. I think she thought she'd get away with it forever, Ellen continued, that you'd never figure it out, or if you did, you'd be too embarrassed to do anything about it. She always underestimated people. They both did, I said quietly. Ellen stood to leave, then paused. I heard you're doing better, that you're traveling, taking classes. I'm glad. You deserved better than what they gave you. After she left, I sat on that porch for a long time, thinking about deserving. For so long, I'd questioned whether I deserved love, deserved respect, deserved honesty. I'd internalized Richard's message that I was somehow less than, that I should be grateful for what I got. But sitting there in the afternoon sun, in front of the house I'd fought to keep, I realized something fundamental. I'd always deserved better. I'd always been worthy of love and respect and honesty. The failure wasn't mine. It was theirs. That was the moment I truly let go. Not of the anger. I think some anger will always be there, and maybe that's okay. But I let go of the guilt, the self-blame, the sense that I should have known better. I did the best I could with the information I had. They chose to betray me. That wasn't my failure. It was theirs. I started volunteering at a local organization that helped elderly victims of financial fraud. I shared my story, helped others gather evidence, sat with women as they cried and raged, and processed their own betrayals. I became an advocate, testifying at city council meetings about the need for stronger protections, pushing for better laws. One woman I helped, Maria, had a son who'd stolen her inheritance and left her penniless. Together we gathered evidence, found a lawyer, got her money back. The day the court ruled in her favor, she hugged me and cried and thanked me for giving her hope. I told her she'd given me purpose. The work was hard but fulfilling. Every woman I helped felt like a small victory, a way to transform my own pain into something useful. I couldn't undo what Richard and Patricia did to me, but I could help prevent it from happening to others. I could make sure other women knew they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't to blame. 2 years after the divorce, I sold the house. It had served its purpose, given me stability during the chaos, but I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need that much space, didn't need the memories lurking in every corner. I bought a smaller condo downtown, modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in so much light. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with bright colors and comfortable furniture and art that made me happy. I gave a lot of my old things to my children. They came and went through the house, taking pieces of their childhood, taking pieces of the family we used to be. It was bittersweet, but it felt right. I was shedding the past, making room for whatever came next. My daughter found the old photo albums, the ones I'd hidden the camera behind. We sat on the floor of the empty living room and looked through them together. Her as a baby, gap-toothed in kindergarten, beautiful in her prom dress. Her father in all those photos, smiling. Were any of those smiles real? She asked me. I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe some of them. Or maybe he was just a very good actor. Either way, they're your memories too. You get to decide what they mean to you. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, for not seeing, for not being here more. You had your own life to live. That's what you were supposed to do. This wasn't your burden to carry. We cried together on that floor, in that empty house, mourning the family we thought we were. But when we left for the last time, locking the door behind us, I felt lighter, freer, ready for whatever came next. My new life downtown was different in every way. I could walk to coffee shops, to theaters, to parks. I made new friends, women who knew me as I was now, not as I had been. I dated occasionally, though I wasn't sure I'd ever fully trust someone that way again. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. Either way was okay. I took up yoga, started eating better, lost weight I'd been carrying for years, got a new haircut, shorter and more modern. Bought clothes that made me feel good instead of practical. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself, but in a good way. I looked alive, vital, present. The breakthrough came 3 years after I'd installed that camera, 3 years after my world imploded. I was sitting in a cafe, reading a book, drinking an overpriced latte, completely content. A man walked by, someone who vaguely resembled Richard from behind. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just glanced up, noted the resemblance, went back to my book. That's when I knew I'd healed. Not completely. I don't think we ever heal completely from deep betrayals. But enough. Enough to live fully. Enough to trust again, cautiously. Enough to believe in my own worth. I think about the woman I was before all this, the one who made coffee in that blue percolator and believed trust was the foundation of marriage. I don't regret being that woman. She loved deeply. She gave generously. She built a life, even if that life was partly a lie. But I also don't mourn her loss, because she evolved into someone stronger, someone who knows her own value, someone who won't settle for less than she deserves. The financial recovery continues. Catherine and I are still pursuing some of the hidden assets, still following money trails that lead to offshore accounts. We may never recover everything, but I've made peace with that. The money matters less than the principle, less than my dignity, less than my freedom. My children and grandchildren are closer to me now than they've been in years. We video chat weekly. They visit often. My granddaughter, the oldest, told me last month that I'm her hero, that watching me stand up for myself taught her that it's never too late to reclaim your power. That made everything worth it. I still volunteer at the fraud victim organization. I've helped dozens of women now, maybe more. Each one reminds me why I fought so hard, why I didn't just accept the betrayal and move on quietly like Richard expected. Because silence protects abusers. Truth protects victims. Last month, I got a letter from Richard, forwarded from my old address. He wanted to apologize, he said, to explain, to ask for forgiveness. I read it once, then put it through my shredder. Some people don't deserve your forgiveness. Some apologies are just another manipulation. I don't need his explanations or his remorse. I don't need anything from him. I have everything I need right here. My health, my independence, my self-respect. I have friends who value me, children who love me, a purpose that fulfills me. I have a life that's entirely my own, built on truth instead of lies. Sometimes people ask me if I regret installing that camera, if ignorance might have been easier. I tell them no, absolutely not. The truth shattered my world, but it also set me free. I'd rather live in difficult truth than comfortable lies. The truth is, betrayal like this leaves scars. I still have moments where I question my judgment, where I wonder what I missed, how I could have been so blind. But those moments are fewer now, quieter. They don't define me anymore. What defines me is what I did after discovery, how I fought, how I rebuilt, how I transformed pain into purpose and loss into liberation. That's my story now. Not the betrayal, but the survival. Not the theft, but the recovery. Not the breakdown, but the breakthrough. I look back on that morning when I found those documents in the basement, and I see it as the first day of my real life. The day I stopped living someone else's version of reality and started building my own. It was terrifying. It was agonizing. It was also necessary. To anyone listening to this who recognizes themselves in my story, who feels that sinking suspicion that something isn't right, who questions their own judgment because someone they trust tells them they're wrong. Trust yourself. Investigate. Gather evidence. Protect yourself. You're not crazy, you're not paranoid, you're not ungrateful or suspicious or difficult. You might be the only one seeing the truth. And if you discover betrayal, know this: you will survive it. The initial shock might feel fatal, but it isn't. You're stronger than you know. You're more capable than they've led you to believe. You can rebuild. You can recover. You can thrive. The path won't be easy. There will be days you want to give up, days the fight feels impossible, days you question whether the truth was worth the pain. But on the other side of that fight is freedom, self-respect, peace, a life that's genuinely yours. I'm 75 now. I have years ahead of me, maybe decades. And those years will be mine, lived on my terms, filled with people who value me and activities that fulfill me. No one will ever steal from me again, financially or emotionally. I've learned to guard my resources, my time, my energy. I've learned that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential. Here's what I wish someone had told me 50 years ago. You don't have to earn love through service. You don't have to prove your worth through sacrifice. You don't have to accept less than you deserve because you're afraid of being alone. Being alone is better than being exploited. Loneliness is better than betrayal. And often, once you have the courage to be alone, you discover you're not alone at all. You're surrounded by people who actually see you, value you, respect you. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well. It's reclaiming your life. It's refusing to let their betrayal define your future. Richard and Patricia stole my money and my time, but they didn't steal my spirit. They couldn't. That was never theirs to take. So yes, I installed a camera in my living room. And yes, it revealed a conspiracy that destroyed my marriage and upended my life. But it also revealed the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was, gave me back to myself. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back. I'd do it all again, make every hard choice, fight every battle. Because on the other side of that war is this life I'm living now. This free, authentic, purposeful life. This life that's entirely, unapologetically mine. And that, more than any amount of money, more than any marriage, more than any false peace, is worth everything. Have you or someone you know lived through something similar? Have you felt that gut instinct that something was wrong, even when everyone told you to trust? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this. And if my story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone or gave you courage to seek your own truth, please hit that like button and subscribe.